Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Earlier today, NASA announced that Mark Kelly would be resuming his training as commander of the STS-134 mission. Joining us today to discuss that decision is Brent Jett, the Director of Flight Crew Operations. To his left, Peggy Whitson, the Chief of the Astronaut Office. And to her left, Mark Kelly, Commander for the STS-134 mission. With that, we'll start with some opening remarks and then take questions. We'll begin with Brent.
Thanks, Nicole. I can see our strategy of having this conference on a day that the center was closed and Houston has a rare ice storm was less than successful. But we're glad you're all here to discuss this topic with us this afternoon. I can tell you that from the NASA family, we're all very, very thankful about the progress that Gabrielle has made over the past few weeks. We all continue to be hopeful and pray for her continued success as she battles back from this tragedy. In fact, it was a large part of the reason we're here today is the fact that she has made such tremendous progress and has reached a point where we're able to discuss a decision for Mark to resume training and fly as the commander of STS-134. That decision was a process, and it started about a week ago. And since it started with Mark, I will turn it over to him and let him start the story.
All right, so on January 8th, about 4 weeks ago tomorrow, as a matter of fact, I was in the ICU in Tucson at my wife's bedside and talking to her neurosurgeon and her trauma surgeon about her prognosis. And at that time, my thought was that I'd very likely be sitting in that same seat maybe 2, 4, 6 months later in that ICU by her bedside. The doctors thought that was certainly a possibility, probably likely. As she progressed day to day, it started to become evident that she was not going to be in ICU in, maybe not even 2 weeks. I was told by all of her physicians that she was going to have a setback, that at one point in the first 72 hours, she was going to get worse. And then again in the first week, she was going to get worse. And she would continue to have days where she just had setbacks, and this was going to be a process much longer than I expected. Since then, 4 weeks ago, nearly 4 weeks ago, she's never gotten worse. As we got to about the 1 week stay in the ICU, we started to evaluate where are we going to move her to for a rehab facility. We received a lot of inputs from a lot of great places in the country. It became quickly evident that one of the best places in the country for this type of injury was here in Houston at Tier Memorial Hermann. So we made the decision to move her, probably a day later than we wanted to. Our neurosurgeon and trauma surgeon thought she could move on Thursday, and we actually moved her on Friday because that's what it took to get the logistics set up. So we got her checked in here, and since then she's made progress every day. So about 2 weeks ago, I started going through the process myself of what would I need in order to get back with my crew to continue training for STS-134. And, this has been a learning process in brain injury for me and what rehab is like. And after speaking to her rehab doctors and the neurosurgeons here, it also became evident that she was going to be very busy. Her days are filled from the time she gets up at 8 o'clock until after 6 p.m. with 6 hours of speech, occupational, and physical therapy. So she's got very busy days and meals in between. And I started to think about STS-134, about the mission, my crew, the fact that I've been training for it for nearly a year and a half, and considering a bunch of other factors, including what Gabrielle would want me to do and what her parents and her family and my family would like, I ultimately made the decision that I would like to return and command STS-134. So at that point, I went to my boss, Peggy Whitson, the chief of the Astronaut Office, and we had a discussion about the next step. So I'll turn it over to Peggy.
Okay. Well, Mark obviously had to make the first part of this decision because we weren't going to ask him to command 134 unless he felt comfortable and ready to do that. And in addition to feeling comfortable, he has an incredible support group, which made us more comfortable with the fact that he had folks to help him through this process, and that it would make it a doable thing for him to perform the mission. From my perspective, obviously, I have to choose a crew that will be able to support the mission, and I want to be able to do that with the least amount of risk overall for the mission and to optimize for success. And obviously, although CJ has been training as a backup the last few weeks, it's still better to choose the fellow that's been training for a year and a half in order to reduce the overall mission risk. So we went forward with the plan back to my boss, Brent.
Okay, so it's back to me. Let's see, it was a week ago on Friday. Peggy had been talking to me a little bit last week, and I knew Mark intended to fly or wanted to fly. So both Peggy and Mark sat down with myself, my deputy, Janet Cavandi, and my assistant, Brian Kelly. And we wanted to talk about the situation and make sure we had thought about all the potential risks to the mission and address those appropriately before we made a final decision. So they came to me. Mark had a very good plan. He had a routine that he explained to me how his days would proceed and how he would be able to commit the time necessary to train for the mission. That made me feel comfortable. We also discussed with our doctors and who were in communication with Gabrielle's doctors about the potential risk of her condition changing over the next 8 weeks or so, and that potentially resulting in a change in Mark's ability to commit his time to the mission. And we had very good answers from the doctors. Mark had a very good plan, but there was a piece that I felt that was missing. And so we looked at this. We said, well, we don't have to make the decision. This was a week ago. We don't have to make the decision today. We need to make it in about a week. So we wanted to put Mark's plan into effect. So we asked him to train this week with a schedule that would approximate a schedule he would have while he was training for the mission, and put his plan into effect and see how it worked out. It also gave us an opportunity to observe Mark. Obviously, as his management, it was important for us to know that he would be able to focus while he was in training and not be distracted by Gabrielle's situation up at the hospital during her rehab. So during the week, Mark flew a couple times in the T-38 with instructors. We asked him to do essentially a complete checkout back into the airplane he hadn't flown since December. So he did that. He was in a shuttle ascent and entry simulation for 4 hours. That gave us an opportunity to observe him, as well as a couple other training events during the week. He was also away for an evening, which he will have to do during training. There will be times when he'll be away from Houston for a night or more. And so he was up in D.C. for a prayer breakfast, and we felt that was a good chance for him to see what it was going to be like to be away from Gabrielle. And I think that was the first time you had probably been away from her, right? Yeah. Since the shooting. So we thought we had a good process for bringing back Mark into training before we made the decision, getting the chance to observe him, and then we met again yesterday. We talked to all the individuals, or as many as we could, that had a chance to observe Mark during the week, and then we were able to unanimously decide that Mark was indeed ready to resume training on Monday and fly as the commander. Of course, I don't make that final decision, and Peggy, myself, and Janet and Brian, we made that recommendation to my boss, Mike Coates. It then went through, obviously, the program, the AA at headquarters, Bill Gerstenmaier, and all the way to Charlie Bolden. So that's how we got from a week ago when Mark felt he was ready to today when we're but I think personally, I'm very glad to be able to have Mark back as the commander of 134.
All right, thank you all very much. With that, we're going to open it up to questions. We do have a limit of 1 hour for this press conference, so we're going to have to keep it to one question each. We'll start here from the Johnson Space Center and then go to Kennedy Space Center and headquarters. If there's any time left, we'll return here for some follow-ups. But again, just one question. If you can state your name and affiliation and who your question is for. And we'll start on this side with Eric.
Hi, and this is Eric Berger with the Houston Chronicle. A question from Mark. Could you talk a little bit about the training that you missed during the last 4 weeks? Was it primarily keep your skills sharp training, or were there specific things programmatically that you missed in the succession?
So coincidentally, we had a little bit of a launch slip about the same time that this happened. So our launch date moved from earlier in April to April 19th. And before that, we had another slip that moved us from February to April. And when that happens, it frees up a lot of time in your launch schedule. So we didn't have a busy training flow even before January 8th. We had actually, which is what we like, something pretty reasonable, rather than a training flow that is jam-packed. And that's because of our launch date moving. So those extra days we got turned out that it helped. So actually I didn't really miss anything. Maybe one orbit sim for what's called dock late inspection. But my crew did a great job at it. And so they don't actually need me. I'm sitting here today. So just that one event, and I'll start up again here on Monday.
Thank you, Mark Carreau for Aviation Week and Space Technology. I think it's for Brent or Peggy. What areas of training do you think Commander Kelly needs to come up to speed on, if any, or will you be looking at most closely?
From my perspective, I think just getting Mark reintegrated with his crew and the crew coordination activities that are required on the flight deck during ascent and entry are key. Obviously, they've had 18 months to work on various different details and aspects of the mission, so I think that will be not an issue at all.
Robert Perlman with CollectSpace.com and Space.com for Mark. In making the decision to fly, did you have a discussion with Peggy or others at NASA about support for in-flight family conferences during the mission, or what resources will be available to you to stay up to date with Gabrielle's progress?
I have not had that discussion. We do have email on orbit, so I can stay up to date with email. We do have what's called an IP phone on board. My experience as a space shuttle crew member is I don't use it all that often. It will probably be similar to that, so my plan is really not to ask for anything extra, and any updates I need I can get via email.
Bob?
Bob Woodruff from ABC News. Mark, has Gabby been able to speak yet?
Well, Bob, I don't want to get into details on her condition or her prognosis, but let me say that she improves every day. The neurosurgeon and the trauma doc's certainly out of the picture now, the ICU doctor, but her rehab doctors are just incredibly impressed with her progress and the fact that the slope of that curve is very steep. They think she's going to make a really good recovery.
You got the okay from her?
Did I personally get the okay?
Did you get the impression with her that she's comfortable with you now?
Well, I know her very well, and she would be very comfortable with the decision that I made.
Mark, Kevin Quinn with Channel 13 KTRK. Can you talk a little bit about the personal debate you had with yourself in your own mind in making this decision? How difficult was that?
Well, it got easier over time. You know, my expectation was I was still that, and I think I even said this to Peggy at one point, is I'm pretty sure I'm done. You know, because my expectation was that she was going to be in an ICU for months in Tucson. And then as that changed and things just happened more or less by, you know, I think her previously that she was in good health, by great care, and maybe a little bit of luck, things improved very quickly. Or maybe people really thinking about her and praying for her. But things fell into place, and she improved very fast. So the decision became easier over time. I obviously weigh time that I can spend with her with what I think is in the best interest of NASA and my crew. So that's a debate I had with myself. But what's key in this is the fact that she has very busy days during, 7 days a week, from the time she gets up until almost the time she goes to sleep. And the support structure, as Brent alluded to, that I have in place, and what the things I've put into place, and the help I get from NASA, help I get from friends and family, to be able to do this successfully. And realizing I know my wife very well, and I know what she would want, and so that makes the decision easier.
All right, next question over here on the left. Yes.
Yes, Captain Ford Atkinson with Fox 26 here in Houston. You mentioned her family was supportive. Could you expand a little bit on that, on what they have had to say to you and what you've said to them about this whole decision-making process?
Well, when I told her mom in the ICU in Tucson that I most likely would not be flying STS-134, she said something like, "What, are you kidding me? You know, you have to go do that." And I explained to her, well, I'm not going to leave an ICU, you know, the ICU when Gabrielle's in the ICU. That's just not going to happen. You know, and it's in another state. So, you know, I thought that was, you know, that was it. And then I had a similar conversation with her father. So they've been very supportive right from the beginning.
All right.
Yeah.
Next question.
Lee Ferlisi from KHOU. Along those lines, was there one thing that she did that really said, okay, I can go now? Was there something, without going into her prognosis in the future, was there something that she did?
Well, the fact that she's improving every day and is, you know, the risk of her getting worse is, I think there's, you know, everybody has risks that they deal with every day. And when I drove down I-45 today with the ice on the road, as many of you did, there's a lot of risk involved there. She doesn't have those risks, and she's in a very controlled and has great doctors, great environment, and she's doing very, very well. So.
Okay, with that, we're going to switch over to Kennedy Space Center, where there are some media with questions.
Yes, Marcia Dunn, Associated Press, with a question for Mark. I'm wondering how much input, if any, Congresswoman Giffords was able to offer you, and if you could provide any details along that line, that would be great.
Well, Marcia, I just don't want to go into details about her condition because then people speculate on prognosis. So, you know, it's just something I don't want to address. She is. You know, we have a discussion, but beyond that, you know, it's not something I feel comfortable talking about.
Irene Klotz with Reuters. Peggy, is CJ going to stay on as backup in training? And for Mark, being an astronaut is a little more risky than a lot of the occupations we have. Do you, how much thought did you give to the risk that you're taking in flying, and as far as your wife's and your family's long-term care? Thanks.
CJ, as a part of his responsibilities as a weather pilot, will continue doing STA flights, and as part of his responsibilities in the office as my deputy, will continue doing ascent entry skills training, but there will be no other specific efforts to maintain additional proficiency.
So spaceflight is a risky business. Apparently so is being a member of Congress. We each, take risks every day in our lives. And from my perspective, I've always evaluated, the risk with what the benefit is. And I really value what NASA does and the Space Shuttle program. I think it's very important. For me, the risk on this mission is probably no different than it was on the last flight. But I do understand your question is if something happened to me, how that would affect her. And that was part of what I considered. And ultimately, I decided that the right thing to do would be for me to return and fly the STS-134.
Bill Harwood, CBS News, with another question for Mark, and I apologize, Mark, I'm certainly not trying to intrude on medical privacy. I just want to make sure that I'm not getting tripped up by the semantics of the way questions are being asked. Just following Marcia's question, I mean, the only question I ever get asked by anybody about this, beyond the tragedy itself, was everybody, I think, would agree that Gabby would obviously tell you to go fly. The question is, did she tell you that in any way? Is there any way you can tell us anything without violating, privacy constraints and all of that? And I ask that with all respect. It's just, that's the question I get asked by virtually everyone. Thanks.
So, I've intentionally, through this whole process, tried not to go down the path of what can she do today and what she can do tomorrow. And what can she say, and how does she do this and that? Because then I wind up in the situation where I feel like I continuously have to give updates that people will speculate on. And I'll continue to get asked those questions again and again. So I made a decision that I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to say what she can and can't do. I'm going to say if she's improving or if she's getting worse. And in this case, she's improving rather quickly, much quicker than the doctors expected. One of her doctors the other day said this is a 1 percentile kind of improvement, meaning that with her type of injury and considering where she was just 3 or 4 weeks ago in an ICU and where she is today is, better than 99% of the other people that they see with this kind of injury.
Todd Halverson, Florida Today. Mark, you talked about Gabby's parents and how they have weighed in here. I'm wondering if you can tell us how your family and your daughters feel about you resuming training for the mission, and whether or not you could say that there was a unanimous consent or verdict on you going and flying.
So my parents, her parents, Claudia and Claire, her sister Melissa, my brother who's on the International Space Station, completely unanimous. We didn't have any dissenters, and when I even extend that to other friends and family, and they're pretty well educated on what her condition is and what my situation is with regards to training and the support system that I have in place. It was unanimous. Everybody felt that this was the right thing for me to do.
Hi, Dan Billow, WESH-TV. Commander Kelly, the decision's made. It's kind of behind you in some sense. I'd like to know how you feel about it. Is there some relief? Is there anxiety that, I've got to meet the schedule, spend a certain amount of time with her a day or a week or whatever that is? How do you feel now that the decision is made?
So my flight surgeon, Joe Dervay, told me when we were even back in Tucson, he says, when you get to the point of making a decision, make the decision, live with it for a couple days, and then make the other decision and live with that one for a couple days. So I actually went through that process over a week ago. And so I got a sense of what it would be like. And as expected, today, a week after I think I first spoke to Peggy about this, I feel very confident that I made the right decision, not only for me, but for my crew members, for my family, and for my wife.
Okay, that concludes the questions from Kennedy Space Center. We'll now switch over to headquarters.
Kelly. Captain Kelly, it's John Schwartz, the New York Times. This is a hard question to ask, but this has sort of become part of a national conversation. Some people are questioning these choices by you and by NASA, saying that family should simply come first, and saying it pretty stridently. So could you respond to that? Is it something they don't understand? How do you respond?
Well, they certainly don't understand her. Well, they don't understand a few things. They don't know her very well, so they don't know what she would want. She is a big supporter of my career, a big supporter of NASA. She really values the mission of NASA. You know, what we do and what our nation gets from that is very, very high on her list of things she really treasures about this country. So I think they don't understand that, and they also don't understand her condition or the support system that I have in place. And I think if they had more details about those things, you'd probably have less people being critical. But I think in any decision that there's a lot of interest in, you're going to have people on both sides.
Yeah, this is Brian Vastag from the Washington Post. Commander Kelly, I'm wondering if the fact that this is, in all likelihood, your last chance to fly on the space shuttle and perhaps the last flight of Endeavour, maybe even the last flight of the shuttle, period, did that play a role in your decision?
No. Didn't have anything to do with it. If I was on STS-124 or it was 108 or 121, my previous flights, I probably would have taken the same steps and got to the same point.
Okay, that concludes the questions from headquarters. We're going to turn back to the Johnson Space Center, and we'll start over on this side. Sorry. Okay, with Eric. Yes.
Hi, Eric with the Chronicle again from Mark. Talk a little bit about what you're feeling now about going back into space. Are you? I mean, I imagine you're excited about the opportunity. Is that tempered at all by what's happened, by sort of the distance that will be between you and your wife? Talk a little bit about that.
I think a little bit. You know, I've always been more excited from one flight to the next. Like my second flight, I was more excited than my first one, and my third one, and same thing here. I do have different challenges this time. With the situation with Gabby, I will be living in downtown Houston and commuting. So instead of a 15-minute commute, I have a 30-minute commute. I'll be staying at a friend's house. So things are a little bit different. Fortunately, I have a lot of support. The Astronaut Office has been great. Not only the astronauts, but family members and other folks that work there, flight crew operations, other friends, people I know downtown. So I have a lot of help. I don't anticipate that this will be that much. The training flow is not going to be that much more challenging than what I had last time, especially with our schedule being, our launch date slipping a little at what is a pretty good time for that to happen. But it might be a little bit different. You know, there's other things to consider. It is my fourth flight, but I absolutely thought that this was the right thing for me to do.
Okay, Mark Carreau.
Thanks again, Mark Carreau for Aviation Week. I think I'm veering a little bit here, but as I recall, there was a pretty interesting DTO on this flight called Storm. Is it still on the mission, and does it stay because you're staying? Would it have fallen off if you couldn't have made the flight, or would that have been a question to be answered later?
That's a very good technical question. It is still on the flight. It is a DTO for a new rendezvous sensor that's going to be used for future spacecraft. And this sensor and a procedure allows us to do a different kind of re-rendezvous. So we undock and separate from the space station, and then later we come back and we do a separate approach. And we get to within about 600 feet, and then we go away and we test this new sensor. It would have still been on the flight. It would have been some additional training that C.J. Sturcow would have had to do between now and the launch day to get him up to speed. But I have some very good crew members that are trained very well, and it would not have taken him that long to get up to speed on storm. So it would have stayed.
All right, back over on this side, Robert.
Hi, Robert Perlman with CollectSpace.com and Space.com again for Mark. Brett mentioned that that you've developed this modified training schedule. Can you describe it a little bit, how it compares to a normal training schedule, and how your own training schedule will, if it does at all, affect your fellow crewmates?
Well, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of this week, I did a 4-hour ascent sim, did 2 flights in the T-38, I did a couple what we call SSTs or DSTs. Then I went out of town on Thursday night, which might be similar to, flying out of town to go fly the STA and getting stuck on the road for, bad weather or going to TCDT. So it was similar to what those days may have been during a training flow. From now forward, Monday forward next week, the training schedule for me is what it would have been anyway. It's not going to be any different.
All right, up here in front. ABC.
No, it's Bob Woodruff from ABC News again. Mark, are you going to have the chance to be able to talk to her when she's in the hospital by the video conference?
Oh, from space?
Space. Will you be able to see her in the video conference? Will she be able to see you?
So we typically do one family video teleconference on a shuttle flight, and it's normally towards the end of the mission, and ours is during the end of the flight. And I think that probably will be accommodated.
Just one time for these 14 days?
Yes, just one time. And Peggy and I haven't talked about it, and it's not something I'm too concerned with because it is at the end of the flight, and if it couldn't be accommodated, we have the IP phone, so you're allowed to make a phone call. We do have email. I think so.
And see you?
Yeah, I think it will.
All right, Gina.
Gina Sinceri, ABC News. One thing that's, I think, getting lost in this is just what a spectacular Mission 134 will be. I mean, for people who don't get the AMS, would you mind giving us a brief description of what it will accomplish?
That's a very good question. The Alpha Magnetic Spectrometer is a very sensitive cosmic particle detector. It's been in development for a number of years. It's had a little rocky road in actually trying to get it launched. And before STS-134 was added as a mission, it had no way to get into space. It's looking for dark matter, dark energy, and antimatter. These are some of the things that existed in the early part of the universe. And it's over the next 10 to 15 years, this cosmic particle detector will sit outside on the starboard side of the space station on the truss, and cosmic particles will fly through it, and it can detect what those particles are. So the hope is, with regards to, as an example, antimatter, to detect maybe a anti-proton or an anti-helium particle, or better yet would be something like anti-oxygen or nitrogen. And those are things, those particles could only be created inside of stars. So if it could detect something like that, then we know there are stars that are made up of antimatter. And physicists believe, a lot of particle physicists, astrophysics physicists, believe that there are possibly galaxies that are made up entirely of antimatter. So that's as an example of one of the things it's looking for. So it's a pretty exciting experiment.
Okay, and back over on this side.
Kevin Quinn again from KTRK. I just noticed a blue wristband on your hand. Does that have anything to do with your wife, and can you describe, if so, what?
Yeah, her office just sent me some of these today. It has the peace sign, the heart sign, and Gabby. I guess peace, love, Gabby. So I just at home and got a bunch of them in the mail. Haven't thought about it. Possibly. See if my OFK PPK list is still open.
Next question in the back.
Mike McGuff, KIH 39 News. I'm just wondering, when you're in space and you will be able to communicate with email, are you prepared to make decisions about her care if something did happen to change? I mean, is that something you're thinking about you have to do up there in addition to commanding the shuttle?
Yeah, that's a good question. So throughout this whole process, a lot of those decisions with regards to her care, Gabrielle's mother and I have consulted, and we've come to agreements. And she's a very smart woman and very capable. So for that period of time that I'm in space, and even probably while I'm in Florida for TCDT, Terminal Countdown Test, I'll just turn those responsibilities over to her mother.
Go ahead.
Juan Lozano, the Associated Press. I wanted to ask you, as far as being able, as you resume your training and get deeper into that, I guess if you could talk a little bit about sort of being able to set aside any kind of worries or distractions you have, and being able to sort of compartmentalize things as far as your focus on your mission as opposed to what's going on with your wife and how she's going and how her care is going forward.
Yeah,
Could you talk a little bit about
the
that?
key word there is being able to compartmentalize things. And that's something you learn very early when you start flying airplanes or doing anything that's high risk, to be able to ignore stuff that's going on in your personal life and focus just on the mission, whether it's flying an airplane, whether around an aircraft carrier or in combat. You learn to separate the mission from things that might be going on in your personal life. So we get a lot of practice doing that. I've been doing that for 24 years. This time it might be a little bit more challenging at times to do that, but this week I demonstrated to myself even that I was able to do that successfully. To sit in a 4-hour ascent sim and do multiple runs with multiple malfunctions and be able to work very well together with your crew and not make any mistakes, told me that in this situation I am able to do that compartmentalization, which I've been practicing for 24 years.
Okay, with that, we are going to return to Kennedy Space Center for media questions there.
Thank you. It's Irene Klotz with Reuters again. I have 2 questions. One's for Peggy about the 133 crew. If you could just give us an update if things are still progressing with Steve Bowen's training and with no expectations of any impacts for that flight. And for Mark, it's kind of interesting how all the good feelings and the peace and everything else, but what happened was, if you were ever angry, it's not apparent, and if you're still angry, it's not apparent. And I guess I'm just wondering how much of a desire on your part to maybe be a little defiant and return to what you think is normal played a part in your decision to go ahead and fly.
For the 133 question, we have the crew has been training since the reassignment of Steve Bowen. We had to shift some of the crew responsibilities in order to even out that crew loading, some of what Mark was talking about for not wanting the crew to be too overly worked during that last training phase. Obviously, we shifted that loading for this crew. We did lose an NBL run, the Neutral Buoyancy Laboratory. One of their spacewalk practice runs was supposed to be today and had to be canceled. We still anticipate that we have enough capability in the schedule to be able to support all the planned events that we had previously on their plan, and feel confident that we'll still make February 24th.
You mentioned being angry, and when a traumatic event happens, there's those different steps that you go through. And I think I very quickly got to angry on the first day that this happened. I can't remember what step 2 was, but I think I skipped right over that one. And it, at times I'm angry about what happened to her and what, if we could ever figure out why this happened. It's really an unfortunate, tragic situation. You also mentioned the word defiant, as if, I think what you were asking was, is that that anger, any way connected to me wanting to return and complete this flight? And I can tell you absolutely not. I mean, what I use to evaluate whether I first want to come back to be the commander of this mission has little to do or nothing to do with being angry, and everything to do with what is right for NASA first, and then for me and my family.
Todd Halverson of Florida Today. Mark, I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the remarkable national outpouring that's come, and how this tragedy spawned a national discussion on civility and politics and even everyday life.
The outpouring of support is a bit humbling. I'm very thankful for it. The emails I get from around the world, from a convent in, whether it's in Germany or in Chile, saying that the nuns are going to do so many Ave Marias this weekend. It's a bit humbling. I know there are millions of people praying for it, and I really think that does help. So it's nice to, it's really nice to see that. It's nice to see that people really care about who she is and what she represented. The political, civil discourse stuff, to be honest, I haven't not been watching an incredible amount of TV. I've seen a little bit of that. I've seen a little bit about it in the paper, but I haven't spent a lot of time following that. But I think, with something that was so horrible and so negative, and the fact that 6 people lost their lives, including a 9-year-old girl, a federal judge, Gabby's staff member, Gabe, who was like a younger brother to her, it's just really, really a sad situation. So I'm hopeful that something positive can come out of it, and I think that'll happen. So I think those are good things.
Marcia Dunn, Associated Press, again for another question for Mark. By the time you fly, Scott will have been back quite some time on Earth, and I'm wondering if how much you're going to lean on him to provide support for your daughters, for the Congresswoman, and how helpful it is to have an identical twin brother in a case like this.
Yeah, well, I think it's helpful to have family members that are close. He lands on March 19th. Our current launch date is April 19th, so he'll be back for a month. And I plan to, he wants to be helpful. He's in a difficult situation when something like this happens. It's a traumatic event and you're on the space station and you really feel a little bit out of touch. I think that's the case with him. So it'll be good to have him back, and he's already told me he wants to be as helpful as possible.
Bill Horowitz, CBS News, with the last question from here. And Mark, given the positive nature of how things have been going with rehabilitation, do you have any hopes that she can come here for the launch? Is that something that you think might be a possibility?
Absolutely. I have every intention that she'll be there for the launch. I've already talked to her doctors about it. So there really shouldn't be any reason why she can't go to the launch. So that's I haven't spoken to Peggy and Brent about that yet, but that's in my plan.
Okay, that's our last question from Kennedy Space Center. We'll now switch back to NASA headquarters.
Hey there, it's John Schwartz again from the New York Times. You mentioned compartmentalization before. Your background is military. Could you compare the separation and family crisis that you're dealing with during this mission to what would be happening if you were still flying fighter jets in combat, if you were on a military rotation? Just sort of fill us in a little bit, how you see the comparison.
Well, it depends on the situation. Sometimes when you have a very difficult family situation, the military allows you to return. It certainly depends on what the mission of that unit is at the time and what the specific situation is. So they're all different and unique, but in some ways, I've learned this compartmentalization thing over 24 years of being in the Navy and flying airplanes. It's something I do every day when I get into T-38, even before this happened. You have stuff that's going on, whether it's with teenage daughters or just issues that you deal with every day, that under these high-risk circumstances, you have to be able to put that aside to conduct the mission. So I've had a lot of practice with that.
Yeah, this is Brian Vasek from the Washington Post again. This is a question for Peggy. I'm certainly getting the message this is a very strong decision, and I certainly understand that. I'm just wondering if between now and April, Commander Kelly, changed his mind or had second thoughts. What would the process be? And is there a certain date by which that becomes problematic?
Mark says he's not going to change his mind. And I mean, that actually was part of the process, that we had to satisfy ourselves that he was ready to make this commitment. I know that he didn't take it lightly, and neither did we. We really did some soul searching. We researched Gabby's condition and, Mark's support system, and really looked into this. We think this is a very doable thing. And it is the best thing for our mission to have Mark be the commander.
Okay, that concludes the questions from headquarters. I'm going to turn it over to Brent, who has some closing remarks.
Well, Peggy just sort of stole my closing remarks, so they'll be short. There was a question earlier to Mark, and I felt like I should have jumped in whether NASA will be criticized for this decision to allow Mark to fly on 134. And I think Peggy just said it very well. When Mark's situation got to a point where he was ready to commit the time and was ready to fly, our job as his management and leaders within NASA was to evaluate what was best for the mission. And it's really as simple as that. And if Mark was ready, and with all the training he has put in and the time to this mission, if he was ready, then obviously that produced the lowest risk, the highest chance of mission success. But we had to take certain steps to assure ourselves that he was really ready. And we felt we covered all those areas in our plan to assess that. And as I said at the beginning, we're really happy that he's back and ready to start training.
Thank you, Brent. That will conclude our briefing. As we mentioned, Mark will be resuming training on Monday with his crew. There won't be media availabilities associated with that, but we will be recording that and making that available on NASA TV. That training B-roll will air on NASA television at 11:30 a.m. Central Time and 3:30 p.m. Central Time. For more information on the STS-134 mission, you can visit our website at www.nasa.gov/shuttle. Thank you very much.